for that very warm welcome and building the pressure up so much. Yeah. So I think all of us have been really delighted to uh, be here at the podium so much so that I even forgot a pen drive to carry the presentation. So I think we have to get back to normalcy and get going with how life used to be. But we all know, nevertheless, life is not going to be the same again. So, anyway, having said that, let me jump into the topic evidence to experience how to choose the right DPP4 inhibitor. I'm extremely grateful to Dr. Banshi sir, Dr. Sanjay Agarwal sir, and Dr. Vasant Kumar sir for having me here to speak on this topic. It's a different one for me, and I'm really delighted with it. The entire team of RSSDI 2021 has done a commendable job, and congratulations on that. Um, so, with that, I think today in his keynote address or his oration, Dr. Banshi clearly, emphasized on where we are today with diabetes, and we know that aggressive steps really need to be taken as far as screening and management go in order to realize our vision of making India diabetes complications free. So, with that, how do DPP4 inhibitors work? Well, incretins or GLP-1 and GIP are gastrointestinal hormones released post meal from the gut, and they stimulate or potentiate the insulin secretion from the pancreatic beta cells, and that accounts for almost 50% of the insulin secretion in response to the food eaten. And DPP4 enzyme is nothing but the one that cleaves the GLP-1 in a minute or two after its release. And inhibitors prevent this and enhance this glucose dependent insulin secretion. So these agents have become extremely popular. They were a novel class of drugs when introduced, and they have become extremely popular now and used often as monotherapy as well as in combination with other anti-diabetic agents. And despite we have a range of them on the market, and despite the common mechanism of action, they have some structural heterogeneity and which gives them different properties, different PK, different PD effects, and different protein binding, metabolism, presence or absence of active metabolites, and definitely excretion routes. And we know that each of these pharmacological properties determine the clinical response, the clinical use of each of these inhibitors. So, in a world where um, pathology-based treatment is coming to the forefront, we need to understand that all patients with type 2 diabetes would have an impact on the incretin effect with loss of the incretin effect, which is specific, important, and very early in the life cycle of type 2 diabetes, as shown here. And this is in response to the oral meal ingested or the oral glucose load. So again, whether it's the American Diabetes Association guideline that prioritizes DPP4 inhibitors in when there is compelling risk of avoiding hypoglycemia or even to cause mild weight loss or maintain weight or manage weight or prevent weight gain, and where cost is important. In fact, DPP4 inhibitors are also recommended in management where they may be used third line if we are not able to use metformin or there is not adequate response with metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1 receptor agonists in case of patients of type 2 diabetes with established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or chronic kidney disease. RSSDI also recommends the same. RSSDI ESI wheel, therapeutic wheel, also recommends similar place for DPP4 inhibitors. List of gliptins that are available in India today, except Gemigliptin, the last one, which was introduced for a while and then taken off the market. Just a sneak peek at this table will tell you the comparative landscape of or the comparative properties of each of these gliptins that are available here, and just to see that there are different dose ranges for each of them, the different PK as well as PD properties. with selectivity and the differential inhibition of DPP4 enzyme, which is achieved over 24 hours. So we know that each of them belong to the same class, however, have very, very diverse properties. So there are almost 8 or 10 characteristics that we need to actually have in our mind when we consider the ideal DPP4 for our inhibitor for our patients. So one, let's look at the efficacy of gliptins. And some factors that I want you to keep in mind is that higher the glucose levels and higher the BMI, there is higher DPP4 activity as seen in several studies. But the efficacy of DPP4 inhibitors is driven by the extent of DPP4 inhibition that can be achieved over a period of 24 hours. And it has been seen that at least 90% inhibition of the DPP4 enzyme should be achieved in order to get clinical efficacy with an inhibitor. So with that, if you look at all the DPP4 inhibitors available today, sitagliptin and linagliptin probably cause the most DPP4 inhibition when they are given once daily at the optimal dose. But the same can be achieved, or more than 90% DPP4 enzyme inhibition may be achieved with vildagliptin given twice daily or administered every 12 hours based on the PK profile that it has. When the comparative efficacy of DPP4 inhibitors was studied in a meta-analysis of 83 randomized controlled trials in patients of type 2 diabetes, you can see the spectrum of effect achieved in terms of HbA1c reduction. And we know even though it's modest, it's clinically relevant reduction in HbA1c with each of these gliptins. On the right, we have highlighted that there is higher efficacy with DPP4 inhibitors used in Asian patients as seen in not just one but a couple of studies and then a meta-analysis done of the same. And there is definitely more or a robust response to DPP4 inhibitors in Asian patients versus non-Asian patients or Caucasian patients with the use of DPP4 inhibitors. Again, this is looking at whether, just drilling down into the efficacy, whether in drug-naive patients or in metformin-treated patients, there is a range of HbA1c reduction that we get with each of these DPP4 inhibitors as seen here. And they reduce HbA1c to the tune of 0.5 to 0.8% as monotherapy. Going into the details, meta-analysis of 55 clinical trials to look at the difference of response to DPP4 inhibitors between Asians and non-Asians found that the glucose level lowering efficacy of these inhibitors is much higher, like I just told you, in Asians rather than other ethnic groups. And different BMIs, different insulin secretory defect level because of the low beta cell mass, higher amount of visceral fat at any given BMI, and increased waist circumference may all be responsible for the same. And emerging considerations in terms of efficacy are now well demonstrated in clinical trials that smoking and weight gain while on gliptins may reduce its anti-hyperglycemic efficacy. So this is an important thing. We probably never bring it up in our discussion with patients, but it's something that we need to keep in mind. And this is especially true when the treatment is going on for more than 3 years. Higher insulin resistance and triglycerides also bring down the efficacy of DPP4 inhibitors. And let's keep in mind that higher levels of serum DPP4 requires more robust inhibition, as we can imagine. In terms of glycemic variability, this study again on glycemic variability is an upcoming parameter for consideration of glucose control. And we all know that we are quite sensitive to glycemic variability reduction because we've seen now it's been well proven to be an independent marker of complications and other and mortality in the future in the life cycle of a diabetes patient. So here we have seen that vildagliptin or pioglitazone were compared for their effect on glycemic variability and oxidative stress in patients of type 2 diabetes in this 16-week randomized open label pilot study where patients were already on metformin open monotherapy, and we found that the mean amplitude of glycemic excursion was significantly lowered in the vildagliptin arm, and as well as the standard deviation of the 24-hour glucose excursion. So again, this is also an important aspect for us to consider using gliptins because they do lower the glycemic variability as well. Now let's look at the selectivity criteria. We know that DPP like enzymes are a group of enzymes or the proteins that are ubiquitously expressed in so many cells and tissues of the body, and they differ in their activity or structure homologs. For example, you may have the membrane-bound DPP4 enzyme, and then you have the free DPP4 enzyme. But we also know that the ideal target for inhibition is the free DPP4 enzyme found in the plasma. Again, there are other related enzymes like DPP8, which is an intracellular enzyme, and so is DPP9. And you have the FAP or FAP, fibroblast activating protein, and their possible roles are implicated in immunity or lymphocyte activation, whether it's cardiac microvasculature or carotid artery endothelium, or even a central role possibly in malignant progression of tumors, even wound healing or blood clotting. So these are important effects of these related enzymes in the family, and this is the reason why we want specific or selective DPP4 inhibitors and not the general ones or those with low selectivity profile. So more or less, most of these gliptins are more than 100-fold selective for DPP4 inhibition as compared to DPP8 or DPP9 or even FAP, with some minor differences in the same. Why is this clinically meaningful? Because preclinically we have seen that non-specific DPP4 inhibitor response is linked with immunosuppression, bloody diarrhea, skin necrosis, and even death. Clinically, I just told you it's related to our immune response and reduction of lymphocyte count, for example, or even hemodynamic abnormalities seen. In rare cases, bullous pemphigoid, prolonged QTC interval, interstitial pneumonia have also been reported. Again, there was one study with vildagliptin called VIVID, which showed increased left ventricular end diastolic volume and increase in the incidence of hospitalization for heart failure, as seen with saxagliptin in the SAVOR-TIMI 53 study. So these are the off-target effects of non-specific inhibition. Now let's look at the clinical impact on hypoglycemia. So we know gliptins are very safe and they have a very low risk of causing hypoglycemia or low to minimal risk of hypoglycemia as such, because they cause the insulin secretion from the pancreas in a glucose dependent manner per se. That's an effect. However, we also know that gliptins like vildagliptin reduce glucagon in hyperglycemia but increase glucagon during hypoglycemia, as seen in this study of drug-naive patients with type 2 diabetes given vildagliptin. Again, in studies with sitagliptin and insulin, when they were compared, one arm with sitagliptin and insulin glargine and the other with placebo and insulin glargine, it was found that, and this was a 743 patient study over 30 weeks, it was clearly found that there is an increased response in terms of HbA1c reduction in the sitagliptin plus insulin glargine arm, with a clear reduction in documented hypoglycemia in the sitagliptin and insulin glargine arm. So that's also reassuring. And again, the Carmelina study in the elderly patient subgroup found that linagliptin improved glycemic control without increasing hypoglycemia. So this is also extremely, this subgroup analysis, you can see that in the table, that the HbA1c reduction in the three age groups defined here, less than 65, 65 to less than 75, and then above 75 years, are all consistent and significant with no increase in hypoglycemia. So, which makes it very suitable for our elderly patients as well. Now we come to the drug-drug interaction, and that's always a consideration when we have any oral anti-diabetic agent, particularly more so for diabetes, because most of these patients are on polypharmacy or polytherapy. We can see that the metabolism of different agents or different subgroups is different, and based on that, there is a possibility of drug interaction. For example, sitagliptin is not really metabolized and is 80% of it is excreted unchanged. Hence, there is no relevant clinically relevant drug-drug interaction with sitagliptin. Vildagliptin is metabolized largely in the liver. Again, no clinically relevant drug-drug interaction found with that. However, with saxagliptin and linagliptin, because of the CYP3A4 induction and inhibition, we need to be a little careful and sometimes avoid or even reduce the dose to half. Next, we look at chronic kidney disease because, again, we are all sensitive to the fact that that at least 50% of our diabetes population may have varying degrees of chronic kidney disease. So again, oral agents may be limited for use in CKD or may cause a safety concern, as you can see here, or may have either a restricted use or a reduction in dose required. However, as far as gliptins, they are effective across the spectrum of chronic kidney disease with no real safety considerations, and they can be safely and efficaciously used across the stages of CKD. Of course, the recommendation to reduce the dose or dosing frequency of gliptins in patients with renal impairment is only to achieve drug exposure that can yield the maximum efficacy. So with that, based on the renal elimination of linagliptin and tenaligliptin, there is no dosage modification required. However, saxagliptin, sitagliptin, and vildagliptin do require dosage modification based on the renal function status. And across mild to severe renal impairment and even end-stage renal disease, linagliptin and tenaligliptin are recommended for use at the same dose. However, others definitely need dose reduction to half or even 1/4 when the renal impairment is moderate or even severe. The non-glycemic effects of gliptins in a patient with kidney disease, there is modest albuminuria reduction as seen with sitagliptin as well as with linagliptin. There may be neutral effect on the eGFR in case of saxagliptin, sitagliptin, and linagliptin, and that on CVD with the same. Now we move on to the hepatic impairment. We again know that hepatic or liver disease in patients of diabetes is common, and we have to use oral drugs especially, very cautiously. So again, there is a lot of drugs may not be used in chronic liver disease. However, as far as gliptins are concerned, linagliptin, saxagliptin, and sitagliptin may be used in hepatic impairment, except sitagliptin in mild to moderate, in severe hepatic impairment should be avoided. However, vildagliptin and tenaligliptin we cannot use in hepatic impairment as seen here. And dosage modification may not be really required in hepatic impairment for linagliptin, saxagliptin, and sitagliptin, and tenaligliptin and vildagliptin are to be avoided completely. Now we move on to the next relevant question or pertinent question, which is cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular safety. In this massive meta-analysis, including 12 randomized controlled trials and comprising almost 11,000 patients of type 2 diabetes, they found that the MHOR or the odds ratio for cardiovascular events was such that it favored the use of DPP-4 inhibitors as compared to sulfonylureas. This is the entire list of completed CVOTs, where you can see that more or less they are cardiovascular safe or neutral. They may not have a benefit, except that there is hospitalization for heart failure increase with saxagliptin as seen in the SAVOR-TIMI study. Gliptin use in patients with history of CVD. No specific concern or warning for patients using sitagliptin. In vildagliptin, there was no CVOT conducted. However, there is caution to be used in patients of heart failure, especially NYHA3 class, and 4 they should not be used or used with extreme caution. Saxagliptin overall safe. However, there was significant increase in hospitalization for heart failure. Linagliptin was found to be overall safe. Tenaligliptin again, there was no cardiovascular outcome study conducted. In several preclinical and human trials, it was found that there is no increased risk of pancreatitis or pancreatic cancer. And even the long-term outcome studies, the cardiovascular outcome trials showed the same, that they are extremely safe. There are tons of extra glycemic beneficial effects of DPP-4 inhibitors, and I just want to highlight a few uh, where we have found that in several meta-analysis studies of 28 studies, the comparative fracture risk was much lower with DPP-4 inhibitor use. In fact, there was preservation of sarcopenic parameters and preservation of lean body mass and strength and physical performance indices also. Uh, Also, there is beneficial effect in terms of the lipid profile. Mini mental state exam score was also improved with DPP-4s in the elderly. There is significant reduction in total cholesterol, and also several inflammatory markers are seen in various studies. And there is also improvement in the intrahepatic lipid, abdominal fat, all the markers of insulin resistance as such, which are benefited by the use of DPP-4 inhibitors, and some application uh, in increasing the progression-free survival in cancer patients, especially those of airway as well as colon cancer. With focus on vildagliptin, I just want to make few points here. I'll take 2 minutes more. Vildagliptin is one of the most widely used gliptin in our country because it's generic in nature now, and the cost has significantly gone down. So, as in view of the efficacy, the meta-analysis has shown overall that vildagliptin was not only efficacious but also without increasing the risk of hypoglycemia or pancreatitis or any serious adverse events or death, and is an effective or viable option as monotherapy or even add-on. So I'm not going to go through those studies, but I want to talk about the VERIFY trial, which was a study done to investigate the long-term clinical benefits of early combination metformin and vildagliptin versus the standard monotherapy with metformin in patients of type 2 diabetes, especially those who were newly diagnosed and with an HbA1c of 6.5 to 7.5%. And I think most of you are aware of the study design. Let me just tell you the key trial findings. Early combination treatment halved the risk of time to initial treatment failure versus monotherapy strategy. Median time, I'll just finish in a minute. Median time to failure was 3 years in the initial monotherapy group as compared to 5 years in the early combination strategy. So we all know what Dr. Banshi said today in the morning, and I think this is a good strategy to adopt for Indian patients who are newly diagnosed. So the strategy is to early combine vildagliptin plus metformin in these type 2 diabetes patients and consistently improve long-term glycemic durability as compared to metformin monotherapy. Initial, and I'm not going to go into the detail, but was a similar study in the real world setting, again comparing the combination of vildagliptin and metformin in drug naive patients with HbA1c over 7.5%. Again, Verify and Initial both had a large chunk of Indian patients. So this is really what is applicable to our Indian setting. And here too, we found that in younger drug naive patients of type 2 diabetes from Asia, initial combination therapy with vildagliptin and metformin is associated with a statistically significant reduction in HbA1c from baseline to week 12 and maintained well up to 24 weeks, and accompanied by good glycemic and weight control. Vildagliptin has also been studied in a study called Virtue in settings where type 2 diabetes patients were fasting during Ramadan, and this was in comparison with sulfonylureas. And clearly, we found that not only was vildagliptin efficacious in controlling glycemia in these patients, but also had fewer hypoglycemic events as expected. So again, vildagliptin has those pleiotropic benefits, the extra glycemic benefits that I talked to you about, including increased beta cell function and preservation. So here I've gone through the entire gamut of evidence as well as experience with particular focus on vildagliptin because that's the most commonly used gliptin in our market today. Several studies are still underway, and maybe at the next RSSDI we'll have an update on the same. So with that, I thank you very much for a patient hearing and an opportunity to meet you all in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.